CAFO permits. But we also have the ability to work with farms in field to help them implement their nutrient management plan and connect directly the practices that they're implementing with farm revenue and overall profit goals. So we have a bit of a unique position in the crop consulting and advisement world, in that we're able to bridge both agronomic in-field practices with regulatory stuff. And I think that's one of the things that excites me most about how we can all work together to get more in-field nutrient management practices on the ground, paired with our traditional things like nutrient management and manure injection. Don't have to tell you all about the 2025 Bay goals and how we've been able to achieve or not achieve some of those goals. We've made a lot of progress in sediment reduction. We've made a lot of progress in phosphorus reduction. Nitrogen reduction, we still have a ways to go. You can look at the state's nitrogen reductions here on the upper right-hand chart and see that we sure are making progress, but we're only about 59% of the way there in terms of what our nitrogen reduction goals look like. So we still have a big list in front of us as we transition to focus on some of our 2040 Bay goals. And you can be sure that anything we can bring to the table that is going to reduce nitrogen loads and reduce the overall nitrogen use or improve the overall nitrogen use efficiency in the field is a great thing. And we think manure injection plays into that. You can do a lot of research on injection, and even in Penn State research over the past couple of years, shows that it's about a 12% reduction in total nitrogen load compared to surface applying your manure. So we're talking about liquid manure, right? You're going to take dairy manure, you're going to take hog manure, and you're going to compare what the differences are from a surface application, both from an economic standpoint and from a regulatory or water quality standpoint. You're going to compare that to what injection or the subsurface placement of that manure can do. And Penn State's research shows about a 12% reduction in overall nitrogen loading, which is a big number. We feel with the 4R Alliance and with the Manure Injection Partnership that you can get even greater reductions when you pair manure injection with other 4R practices. And I hope that's what you'll come away with as we look through some of the examples that we've been able to develop in today's webinar. Here again, just thinking about low disturbance manure injection. And I want to be able to put it on the same page as what many of you would consider nutrient management or no-till, that if you want to get an effective no-till system in place, you want that to work the most for a farmer. You have to look at other surrounding practices. And if you want no-till to work right, we've got to look at cover crops. We've got to look at best management fertility issues and just making sure that we have that system working the best for us. Low disturbance manure injection is no different, right? It can be part of a greater overall system that a farm puts in. Some of those systems are going to be very much agronomic focused to drive yield, but some of those systems are also going to be looking at the overall regulatory framework of a farm and how do we implement practices that are going to make compliance easier and compliance better, not only for the farm, but also for society as a whole. So injection definitely hit both of those categories, which again, is probably why I find a lot of interest in helping improve adoption rates of injection, because it does connect both of those things. For those of you who may not be overly familiar with what we're talking about when we talk about low disturbance manure injection, this is a great picture right here. You can see in the foreground the part of the field that's already been injected, and you can see all the residue on the soil surface. We are talking about something that is consistent with a no-till production practice. When done right, you can inject manure and a week later or 2 weeks later come back and no-till your crop right through those injection slots without any problem. This picture also has, if you can squint, right between the M and the D and minimal soil disturbance off to the left of that, you can actually see the Susquehanna River. And so here we are injecting manure. This would have been July of 2025. on wheat stubble on a field right next to the river. And we know that through the injection of that manure that we're going to have a minimal impact on runoff going down towards the water. So low disturbance manure injection does not work in every situation. And I definitely want to point out where it's a good idea and where it's not a good idea. Because as you all are going to go out and have effective conversations with your farms on whether or not they should be doing injection, whether it's right for them, how are they going to quantify success, I want you to have some tools in your back pocket that you can use to have better conversations. Manure injection works great when you have high ammonia concentrations in your manure. So you're going to want to have up-to-date manure analysis. You're going to want to have that regular information coming in to help you understand what your ammonia concentrations are. Injection works great when we're in situations where we need odor reductions for neighbor or landowner satisfaction. Injection works great when you have phosphorus indexing concerns. If you have a high phosphorus index, but you still want to be able to work manure somewhere in that rotation, injection gives you a tool that you can still apply some manures even with a higher phosphorus index score. And from a practicality standpoint, injection works great when soil conditions are dry. All right, that's an important thing, but it's something to keep in mind. We worry about compaction a lot. One of the great things about injection is that we, particularly when we move from tanker applied manure to dragline injected manure, we're pulling a lot of weight off of those fields and we're reducing our compaction potential. But there's a couple of different kinds of compaction. You can have tire compaction from your tractors or from your tankers, but you can also have sidewall compaction from your injection units. And it's exactly the same sidewall compaction that you would see from a corn planter. If you're going to go out and plant corn and conditions are too wet, you're going to get that sidewall compaction where the double disc opener of a corn planter smears the sidewall. It almost creates concrete where the roots cannot expand beyond the trench. Manure injection will work the same way. If you do it when it's too wet, you're going to create that sidewall and all of your nutrients are going to stay locked in the trench. And so one of the times people do not want to be using manure injection is when their soils are too wet and they're going to cause that sidewall compaction. When I think back over the past couple of years to our customers, the biggest complaints that they've had on manure injection center around they made a mistake and they did it when it was too wet. Should have known better, but they did it anyway, and they're going to pay the price for that. So please keep that in mind when you're trying to work with your customers to figure out when manure injection is not going to work. Wet soils, not going to work. Other thing I'd want you to keep in mind is if somebody's going to do fall applications, they're going to go out today in November and they're going to inject manure in a bare cover field, right? It's just corn fodder, it's just soybean stubble, there's no cover crop there, but they're going to go inject that manure today and expect higher availability in the spring when they plant their corn. Probably not going to happen, right? So we want to make sure that our expectations on nitrogen retention are realistic. That falls into low nutrient manure content. If they have a low nutrient content manure, the payback on injection is not as great. We definitely want to keep that in mind for dairies that have a lot of wash water in their pits and just have a lower analysis. So like I said, I want you all to go out and have effective conversations on manure injection, but I definitely want you to understand where it's going to work and where it's not going to work. The final thing I have on here, it doesn't work when you have a short planting interval, right? And this is very much an agronomic thing, but we've seen situations over the past couple of years on dry years, right? Only happens on dry years, but you're going to go and you're going to inject hog manure or some other high ammonia nitrogen concentrated material. And then 4 or 5 days later, you're going to come right back in and you're going to plant over top of those injection slots. Well, in that short amount of time, the ammonia hasn't had a chance to lock onto the soil, or it hasn't had a chance to change form, and it can kill your seed. It can burn your roots. It can cause a drastic loss of stand. And nobody wants that when we're trying to get a farmer to adopt a practice and have success. We definitely don't want them to lose 20% of their corn stand because of that short planting interval. So in the springtime, when I have people that are looking to move towards injection and I want to find the best scenario for them to have success, I'm going to focus on the spring. And I want them to put it on in the spring. And ideally, I would like to have at least 7 to 10 days between the application and planting, or I want one rainfall of a quarter inch to a half inch to help that ammonia conversion so that we're not looking at ammonia burn, because they will see it for the first half of the growing season and they will complain incessantly about it. And it just leads to bad outcomes. We don't want bad outcomes. So keep those things in mind. So how injection pays, I would want you to think of a couple of different things, right? Two in particular. Injection is going to pay when we reduce nitrogen fertilizer use. And injection's also going to pay when we're able to increase yield and increase yield resiliency, right? And so yield resiliency may be a new term for some of you, but I'll tell you a story about corn in Pennsylvania, right? Since 2000, the average corn yield in the state has increased by about 2 bushels per acre per year. So here we are, in 2025, almost 2026, and the average corn yield in the state of Pennsylvania has increased somewhere between 45 and 50 bushel per acre. Right? It's an astounding number, and it's because of a couple of different things. Right? It's because of all the work that we do to improve soil health resiliency. It's a very important factor into why our yields are increasing. It's also due to our genetic improvement and how we can genetically modify crops to become more resilient across environmental situations. And the third part of it is how we're able to improve our equipment and improve our fertilizer BMPs. Right? It's almost a three-legged stool as to why we're able to increase corn yield by 50 bushels over the past 25 years. But as we continue to intensify the production system and add stress to our soil, right? We're stressing our soil to meet a higher nutrient demand. Any BMP that we can add to the landscape that adds resiliency to the system is a winner, right? And so we want to continue on the soil health journey. We want to continue on better genetics that we get from our seed companies. And we want to continue looking at any kind of fertilizer BMP or manure BMP that adds resiliency to the system. And that's where manure injection fits in. We're adding resiliency to the system that under a higher demand, we have the ability to meet and exceed the plant's needs throughout the growing season. Some negatives about LDI, low disturbance injection. It costs more. You're not going to get away without spending an extra $20 to $30 an acre on injection, right? If you compare surface application of manure versus injection, injection is slower, takes more time, and you also have added equipment and the maintenance on that equipment. So there are added costs to injection. We need to make sure that the positives outweigh those added costs, but it also increases management. And as I said earlier, when you have people that have made mistakes with manure injection, it's because they weren't aware of the increased management needs. So that increased management is not all on the farmer, right? That increased management is also spread across his advisors. And how you advise a customer to adopt injection is really based on helping them avoid some of these negative things, right? That's part of our job as an advisor to help them avoid these negative things. So I was trying to figure out how I was going to present this information today, and I kind of struggled. I really didn't have a great plan. And what I ended up doing was calling a couple of our rose tree clients that I've been injecting for a long time, and ended up creating like a 7-question questionnaire to send out to 10 of our clients, just asking them how I should approach this conversation today. And it turns out we're going to end up focusing on 3 of those farms and tell their story a little bit. The first 2 farms, Stelz Lane Dairy, which is the picture on the left, and Schlappick Farms, the picture in the middle, they've been injecting for years. Schlappick Farms have been injecting for 10 years. Stelz Lane Dairy has been injecting for more than 5 years. And then the last story that we're going to look at is Juniata Grain, and they're going to be adopting injection in 2026. So I want to go through some of the conversations that we've had with them about why we're going to adopt injection and kind of what they're looking for from that. So we'll start with Schlappick Farms. And as we go through these, if you all have questions, please put the questions in the question box. And before we move on to the next farm, we'll talk about this farm just to make sure that we've got all of the questions answered. So Schlappick Farms is in Berks County. They farm about 650 acres. They are a CAFO. They have their CAFO permit. They have their Act 38 plan. They raise ducks on a liquid system. Crops in rotation: corn, soybeans, sorghum, small grain. Their rotation continually changes. If you went back in time 5 years ago, sorghum was not really planted. But as they've looked at economics, as they looked at market opportunities, and as they looked at overall nutrient use efficiencies on the land that they farmed, sorghum has really come into the rotation and been a great crop for them to use. They've been injecting for a fairly long time. They started about 10 years ago with just tanker injection on 30-inch spacing. And with these injection units that are on the market today, you can have different spacings of injection rows. The older ones, and most of the ones that you find on the back of manure tankers, are 30-inch rows. So every 30 inches, you're going to have an injection slot. Some of the dragline ones that are coming on the market today are 18-inch. And the configuration will vary too. You can have a 30-inch injection unit with kind of that double disc opener like you would have for a corn planter, where it's two double discs. They're going to create that trench. The manure is going to go into the trench, and then you have a closing system on the back. The newer ones, it's almost a one disc system, but the disc is angled, and the manure falls into the angled slot, and then the soil kind of closes up behind it. So over time, they've modified their injection to going to dragline where it's appropriate, and still using the tanker injection for some of their farther away fields. They do a lot of partner BMPs, as I think you'll find with some of these examples that we have here today. The injection works best when it's partnered with other BMPs, right? And it's BMPs that you would recognize, right? In the case of Schlappick Farms, we're pairing manure injection with no-till, sometimes reduced tillage. We're pairing it with their nutrient management plan. They're doing cover crops. They're split applying their nitrogen. They're using enhanced efficiency fertilizers. They're doing some variable rate seeding, and we're also doing some variable rate fertilizer applications. All those things are happening on the injected acres. All right, so we're trying to pair as many BMPs as we can with the injection to maximize the profitability that we're seeing from the system. When you think of their manure, here's their manure analysis. It's about 29 pounds of total nitrogen. It's about 13.5 pounds of ammonia nitrogen. As you start to think about injection and how we advise farms on whether or not it's right for them, that's the number we start with, right? That 13.5. That tells you so much about whether injection is going to be an economical benefit for a farm. The higher that ammonia number is, the better, right? So we've got the duck manure here from Schlappick Farms at 13.5. Keep that in the back of your mind. As we get to the other two examples, you're going to see varying differences in ammonia concentration. This is their 5-year average manure analysis. The analysis does fluctuate based off of how much rainfall we get into the storage in any given year. And it also fluctuates based off of the quality of the sample that we end up taking. But the nice thing about this farm is we have multiple years of data points that we can create a farm average and improve our confidence in what this analysis is telling us. So we've got our analysis, and if you run your nutrient management calculation or just do a basic mass balance calculation, if you surface applied their manure, now they do a 5,000 gallon application, so keep 5,000 gallons in your mind. But from a 5,000 gallon application, surface applied in the spring, you get about 52 pounds of nitrogen available to you. If you take that same 5,000 gallons, and inject it, you get about 100 pounds. That's generally what we find, right? If somebody's going to move from surface application to injection, it just about doubles the amount of their available nitrogen. So even if you didn't have great manure analysis data, the one thing you could do is say manure injection doubles your available nitrogen. So if we go from 52 to 49 pounds, it's a 47-pound difference, right? And if you took today's fertilizer prices, and this is actually Monday's fertilizer prices, I had texted some of our ag retail partners asking them what urea, MAP, and potash was going for this week. And when you take the urea price and you work backwards to figure out what that 47-pound advantage to manure injection is worth, it's worth about $31.50 in today's cost. Other thing to keep in mind, right? I mentioned that this farm is a CAFO. This farm has an AC 38 plan, which you can guess means this farm has very high phosphorus levels. And we're limited in the nutrient management plan because of those high phosphorus levels and because of proximity to surface water. We use the phosphorus index to help us identify which fields have a higher risk for phosphorus loss. The farms that they have that are immediately around their duck barn have high phosphorus index scores because over time phosphorus levels have gone up. What injection allows us to do is it allows us to place that manure below the soil surface and have a much lower phosphorus index score. It still doesn't get us out of having a long-term plan in place to lower phosphorus levels, but it does allow us, right? If they have a 4-year rotation and one of those years is corn, it allows us to put an extra manure, one manure application in for the corn year that then we can use the next 3 years in the rotation to continue our downward movement of soil phosphorus. If you think about a 5,000 gallon application here, right? 5,000 gallons, our phosphorus levels are 26.1 pounds per 1,000 gallons, 130 pounds of phosphorus that we're putting on in one application. And just simple math on the crops that they're growing, that's 2 years worth of phosphorus. So if we want to have a plan in place that allows them to draw phosphorus levels down, yet still utilize their manure as much as we can, manure injection is a tool that allows us to do that. Next week, when you all come back for the second part of our webinar, we've got 2 great nutrient management planners. We have Jed Moncavage from Team Ag. We have Amber Funk from Rosetree Consulting. Both of them are going to share some of their planning hurdles and examples of how they integrate injection into their nutrient management planning. Today, I just want to focus on mostly the economics, but there definitely is an intersection of how regulation is affecting the economics on farms. So here is Schlothick Farms 2025 corn yield map. And the map that you see here on the left is it's a departure from the average map, right? Because we do worry a lot about how we share data, how we share our farmers' data, and to make it still visually impactful without sharing actual data, we convert things into a departure from the average map. But their corn yield averaged 177 bushels this year in 2025. We fertilized for 190. You can see where those nitrogen sources were going to come from. But the one thing I want to point out on this map is the green areas of this map yielded 280 bushels. The purple areas of this map yielded right around 100 bushels. And it's all the same soil type, right? It's all a Weichert soil with a B slope. The mapping unit is WEB. But that's what yield variability looks like across a field with the same soil type. It's amazing to see how yield varies across a field. And you take it one step forward, isn't it amazing to see how nitrogen loss and nitrogen use efficiency can vary across a field? We fertilized for 190 bushels in the purple areas. We got 100 bushels, right? We over applied nitrogen by 90 pounds to the acre. In the green areas, we fertilized for 177 and we got 280, right? Where did that nitrogen come from? But when you think about variability throughout the field, that's what we deal with in just about every single field in Pennsylvania. So some of the data that we're gathering on these farms is very powerful for us to help them take manure injection and overlay some partner BMPs in order to make the right decision on how we're going to manage our crops. one of the questions that you should have is you have the same soil type and you have 180 bushel yield gap between the purple areas and the green areas. Eric, what's going on there? And that's going to vary year to year. But I will tell you that in the purple areas, we have poorer drainage, we have less gravel, and we have a different clay species and a different clay content in the purple area compared to the green areas. The green areas have better drainage, a higher gravel composition, and a different clay. We're going to have different loss pathways, right? Different nitrogen loss pathways in each of those zones. When I get into the purple areas with poorer drainage and a higher clay content, I'm going to experience a lot more denitrification losses in those areas compared to the green areas of the field where I have more gravel and I have better drainage. I'm going to experience a little bit more leaching loss. So we want to make sure that whatever fertilizer BMPs we're putting in place in the landscape, it has the ability to address loss in a varying way across the field. In this particular farm's case, we knew that there was a lot of variability throughout the field, which is why we're using enhanced efficiency fertilizers when it comes to our supplemental nitrogen. When they're putting their 70 pounds of nitrogen on as an EEF fertilizer, it's polymer coated urea, it may be an agrotane coated urea, we may blend some ammonium sulfate that is a different nitrogen source, but we're not just taking the most at-risk fertilizer source and throwing it out there. We're putting protected fertilizer sources out there so that we can extend the availability and reduce the loss of that fertilizer nitrogen we're putting down.
Hey, Eric, before you
Yeah.
continue, we have a question in the chat. We have a couple of questions, but I think two of them you're going to get to shortly. But there's one about the creation of these maps, the departure from average yield map. Are you creating those manually, or how is that done?
So that's done within our GIS systems. You're going to bring in yield data over a multi-year period. And you're going to go through that yield data, sift through it, eliminate the bad years, and just focus on the years where you have good data. And then you're going to create multi-year yield analysis layers where you take the yield from 2025, which averaged 177 bushels. All I'm going to do is turn 177 into 100%. And then every other yield data point in the field becomes a relationship to 100%. And then I'm going to do that for wheat, and I'm going to do that for soybeans. I'm going to do that for the corn that they planted 3 years ago. And everything becomes a percentage. And now you're not comparing apples to oranges anymore. You're comparing apples to apples through a percentage relationship. Once you create those maps, you can start looking at departure from the average. And you can look at departure from the average in any given year. In our system, it's just a button that we click to create a different algorithm. But it helps visualize where yield is and where yield isn't in your field. Right? Does that make sense? So, okay.
I think so.
Any other questions?
Not right now. The only other questions were just about like a specific economic calculation. And I said you were going to get to those. So let's keep going.
Yeah, I do have an economic calculation. You can be your judge of how specific it is. So how we're calculating the value of injection on the farm is we ended up doing a few years of on-farm trials where we connected. We had soybean stubble that we were doing injection, and we compared it to just doing surface application plus 50 pounds of fertilizer. And the injection had no extra fertilizer, and it still yielded about 3.2 bushels more. You talk to Lee about it, and sure enough, he's doing it because it's reducing his fertilizer costs and it's improving his yield resiliency, right? There's two main reasons why he's doing it. But if we wanted to put numbers to it, we've got a slight increase in yield. Let's use that 3.2 bushels at whatever price of corn you want and assign a number to that. When we used injection, we were able to eliminate his side dress application. So that side dress savings includes not only the cost of nitrogen, but also the cost of application. And then you take out your cost of injection, and we're left with about a $34 per acre ROI, which you may look at that and say, wow, $34 an acre is a lot, right? And it is, right? $34 an acre is a big number. But to put that in context of yield, $34 an acre at $5 corn is 7 bushels to the acre. So you're always comparing how they are adopting a practice to save money versus how they are adopting a practice to drive yield and to drive production. Nice thing about manure injection is it can help them do both, right? We can increase yield, we can drive production, we can improve the resiliency of our fertility system, while at the same time helping to manage costs. Other thing that I would point out with Lee is that they are a regulated farm, and I asked him in particular, how does freeing up acres by using injection impact the overall ROI on the farm? And he had to do some thinking about it and arrived at a number that we thought, maybe the use of injection on high phosphorus soils once every 4 years, as allowed by his nutrient plan, was about a $9 an acre savings. So we would figure the ROI about $44 an acre. So that's kind of how we're calculating it. As we kind of get close to the end of our time here today, I'm going to jump and skip the second example, and I'm going to go right to the third because it's pretty interesting. This third example here is for Juniata Grain. It's a 1,500 acre cash grain farm. Corn, soybeans, wheat. They import poultry and hog manure to offset fertilizer costs. And again, we're pairing a lot of BMPs with manure injection. We're pairing no-till, cover cropping, planting green, nutrient management, variable rate seeding, variable rate fertilizer, you name it, right? Those are the things that we're putting on the same acre where we're doing injection. They have a manure analysis that they sent me. And here it is, right? 65 pounds of total nitrogen, 37 pounds of ammonia nitrogen. Those are big numbers for hog manure. If you looked at it, it's not a 5-year average analysis. This was an actual analysis taken last year by the farm where they import manure. Does it match the agronomy guide table 1.2-10, right? That's your resource if you want to figure out where to start with manure analysis. And it doesn't, right? You look at hog manure from a finishing farm, that table is going to list nitrogen at 31 pounds per 1,000 gallon and ammonia nitrogen at 11 pounds per 1,000 gallon. So we have a sample here that is far and above average. Doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it also doesn't mean that it's right. And it works out great on paper, right? If I'm going to surface apply this hog manure at 5,000 gallons, I'm going to get 80 pounds of nitrogen. If I inject that same manure, I'm going to get 196 pounds of nitrogen, right? That's like, it's a crazy amount of nitrogen. So I'm planning a 5,000 gallon application into soybean stubble to achieve a 200 bushel yield goal on a field that frequently receives manure. Right? So now all you are doing your nitrogen calculations in here. I got 200 bushel corn that I'm going for. And I just put on paper 247 pounds of nitrogen on this field, right? Just on paper, right? That number should not prevent you from doing injection on that farm. But it does force us to think about the quality of information that we are using in order to advise our farmers, right? I look at this number and I say, that number's probably not right, but what are we going to do about it? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the injection in the spring, and we are going to resample the as-applied material in the spring of 2025. Chances are it's not going to come back as high as this. And then we're going to use an adapt-N nitrogen model to guide our side dress applications as time goes by. But just on nitrogen alone, the difference between surface application and injection is $77 an acre based off of that analysis. The other thing that Juniata Grain has going on for them is they have low phosphorus levels and low potassium levels. So our P levels are 26, our K levels are 106. All you out there know that in that situation, we're buying a lot of fertilizer to overcome some deficiencies. Fortunately, our 5,000 gallons of hog manure is going to give us 160 pounds of phosphorus and 246 pounds of K2O. You do the math on that, that's $225 per acre of fertilizer value that he's getting from that manure application. And he would have gotten that value whether he surface applied it or whether he injected it. But keep in mind, in low fertility environments, which we have a lot of in the northern part of the state and in the western part of the state, banding nutrients gives you an efficiency bump, right? If you surface apply phosphorus in a low phosphorus environment, a lot of that phosphorus is going to get pulled into the soil and may not be plant available. Banding allows a higher availability to low phosphorus situations, which is exactly what we're after here. So 2026 is going to be the first time that this particular farm is going to do injection. We're not going to do any side-by-side comparisons in this field. It's just too hard to manage. But what we are going to do is we're going to go back and look at this particular farm over the past 5 corn crops and look at its ranking of yield to farms around it. And it's not perfect, but it's actionable and reproducible that when 2026 yields come off, we can do the same thing to see if the ranking of this farm has improved. You can take your data layers and you can filter by soil type or by planting date, variety, and geographic proximity to try to fine tune your comparisons that way. But it does work, right? It does give us some actionable information. So looking forward to doing injection on this farm. We've already calculated that if this manure analysis is correct, that's a big if, right? If this manure analysis is correct, it's going to save them $100 an acre in P&K fertilizer purchases. So the reason he's looking at adoption is very much NP&K reductions and costs. When I was talking to this particular farm this week in preparation, I was asking them, I said, what do you want people to know? And he said, in our neck of the woods, nutrients are really valuable and we can't let them get away. We've got to put them where they're going to give us the most efficiency and the biggest return on investment. And he said, even though I know there are some problems and issues with injection, I've got to look at banding nutrients as a way to improve my overall use efficiency and drive production on my farm. So here's where we think injection is going to work for him. If everything is right with that analysis, we're going to be saving about $87 an acre in total costs when we go from surface application into injection. I hope it works out. Keep in mind,
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah,
we have a
ahead,
question.
Yep.
So as an agronomist and a consultant, how much trust do you place in the manure analyses that are provided with balance sheets for imported manure? And then there's a part 2.
That's a great question. How much do I trust them? If I'm looking at a 5-year average that comes right out of the Act 38 plan, I have confidence in that. I know it's just you're taking your little container to represent your 2 million gallon manure storage, and what are the chances that that's accurate? That always comes into play. But you can overcome some of those bad data points by just having more samples, right? Just keep sampling. Where I really struggle is where somebody has one analysis. And in this particular farm, it's one analysis from a new hog barn. Well, of course, a new hog barn is going to have really high nutrient levels. The waterers don't leak. And so you have high nutrient concentrations. So I do question manure analysis data from time to time, just depending on how frequently it's being obtained.
And then the second part of that question then is, how do you address that uncertainty to make sure that you're fertilizing at the appropriate level and not under fertilizing, because you're trusting that manure analysis so heavily?
First thing I do is when I see a manure analysis is I compare it to other farms. You'll have comparable farms, right? If you have a new hog barn and you look at the first analysis that comes out of that new hog barn, well, this isn't the first new hog barn that we've worked with. So let's go back and look at 5 other hog operations and look at their first analysis. Does this one match up? I use a lot of comparison analysis when I try to figure out if a sample is good or when I'm trying to calculate supplemental fertilizer loads. I think the AC38 template is a great mass balance calculation that we can use to get us in the ballpark of where we need to be. But particularly on injection sites, the more you compare in-season adaptive information with it, whether it's the AdaptN nitrogen model, whether it's using the PSNT, which can be a highly effective tool to help farmers make in-season decisions on nitrogen use efficiency. And my experience with injection is that that is where the real ROI lies, right? The ROI does not necessarily lie in the act of injection. The ROI lies in the decisions that you make based off of in-season information to modify your fertility needs, modify your nitrogen. That's where the biggest ROI lies. So I'm going to jump ahead of this one too. And let's share with you my questionnaire that I did with my clients, and to just let you see what their answers were. So one of the questions was, how has manure injection affected your fertilizer use, right? Your purchased fertilizer use. And you can see they're all reducing their fertilizer use, right? Well, the reason they're reducing their fertilizer use is because they had an advisor sit down with them and show everything on paper how it's going to work. They had somebody show up at their farm and pull some in-season tests to give them the confidence to reduce their nitrogen. Farmers are not going to automatically reduce fertilizer use just because they injected. There's a lot of unknowns and a lot of risk that they need somebody to come in and help them overcome and help them get past some of those unknowns. But with the clients that we work with, because we work with them so frequently, they're a little bit skewed in their answers. And once you know it, all of them are reducing their fertilizer use. Second question I asked them is, how has injection affected overall crop yield or yield resiliency? And you notice nobody has told me that it improves their yields drastically. And the reason for that is, take 200 bushel corn. And if I want to have a 2% yield gain in that 200 bushel corn, it's 4 bushels. That's statistically significant, right? A 2% yield gain, a 4% yield gain would be amazing. And so those type of yields, to go from 200 to 204, a farmer may not recognize that as a noticeably increased yield. They're going to look at that and be like, nah, yields are slightly higher. Maybe they're about the same. But when you look at it on a percentage basis, we are after practices that improve yield 2 to 4%, right? If we can improve yield 2 to 4%, those are gold medal winners every day of the year. Last question I asked them, what is the biggest value of manure injection, right? And I'll ask you to all think about it. Think about that for 5 or 10 seconds. What do you think the biggest value, what do you think farmers think the biggest value to manure injection is, right? Is it the reduced fertilizer use? Is it, I'm going to improve my yields? I was surprised to find out that 100% of them told me that the biggest value is just improved nutrient use efficiency, right? They want to improve the resiliency of their fertilizer system or their fertility system. They want to make sure that we're doing everything we can in an ever intensifying production system to make sure that there are nutrients available during every growth stage, and that when we have conditions that allow us to get opportunity yield and get 280 bushel corn when we only fertilized for 190, that their system can easily flex to give them that efficiency. So when you're out there talking to farmers, why do you want to adopt injection? Nutrient use efficiency. That fertilizer or fertility resiliency is probably first and foremost in their minds. So LDIs at a glance, a lot of this stuff comes from the work that we've done, plus the research work that others have done through the years. Like I said, Jed and Amber will be here next week to talk about some nitrogen loss comparisons and also some phosphorus runoff reductions. And yeah, one other thing I want to point out to this group is the manure injection partnership. We have 2 RFPs that are going to be coming up here in the next couple of months. We would love to have you. We would love to have anybody that you know or anybody that you think would be a good fit for the program. We'd love to have them apply. Um, if you have questions on that, please reach out to me. Please reach out to Brooke. You can reach out to the Manure Injection Partnership, and we will do our best to make sure that you get the information that you need. So thank you.
All right, we have a couple of questions in the chat, but at this time, I'd like to ask just for the last time, if you're here for CEU credits, that you put your name and certification number, including the state that you are certified in the chat. And Eric, I'm going to just go through some of these questions, and if there are others, please feel free to put them in the Q&A now. But the first question is about horse manure, and can horse manure ever be used for injection?
So we're just talking about liquid manures here. So if I've never seen horse manure as a liquid, but I guess it could be. But if it is a liquid, yeah, you could inject it. If it's a dry manure, probably not.
All right. Second question is about dribble bar versus injection. And dribble bar versus injection for actual nutrients and nitrogen savings. Does anyone have good data? Dribble bars would be less cost for equipment, less weight being added to the spreader and the tractor, faster spreading. Is there any data available comparing those two methods of manure application?
We've done our best over the past couple of years working with our friends at Hoover Ag, which is Spelt Plain Dairy, the one example that we skipped over, to try to get some of that information. We've done weekly in-season nitrogen tests comparing surface application versus dribble bar versus injection to see if we could piece out any differences in soil nitrate availability through the year. We did some dribble bar applications over standing corn. This year, the corn was about 6 inches tall, and we did drag line application with the dribble bar on about 40 acres. And so that was really interesting to follow through. There are times where dribble bar is a better option, right? Obviously, if you're going to do in-season applications, dribble bar is going to be better. If you're going to do early season top dress on rye or wheat or triticale, dribble bar is a better option. When it comes to spring applications, right, we're going to go out on April 25th after we've taken our rye silage off, and we're going to compare dribble bar versus injection. I think the safe assumption is the dribble bar lies somewhere between a surface application and injection, but we're really not sure how far. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I would love to come up with some simple experiments that we could do in the field to answer those questions. So if you have ideas, I am all ears and would love to play along.
All right. And then Charlie's asking, in theory, farmers should reduce their nitrogen application according to the nutrient balance calculations using the agronomy guide availability factors. Do you find that there's any reluctance to reduce the full amount indicated by those calculations for risk mitigation?
Yes, yeah, we do. So let's take let's take Schloppick Farms, where we figured that we had about a $35 an acre savings, and it was 7 bushels of corn. At some point, fertilizer reduction becomes a yield risk, right? Where if we reduce fertilizer too much, our yields go down, and we only have 7 bushels to play with. And that may or may not be a risk tolerance that farmers are comfortable with. And so, yep, you can show them the numbers and you can do the calculations, and they still have a lot of questions because they are very much unwilling to sacrifice production, and they should not be willing to sacrifice production to adopt a new BMP. And so we find ourselves doing a lot of on-farm trials where, hey, you're going to go and you're going to inject 100 acres of manure after rye, and can we take these 5 acres and manage them a little differently? And we do that for year one, and then maybe we do it for year two because we have different environmental conditions. And somewhere between year three and year five of working with that farmer, you build enough confidence and trust with them that they start to reduce their fertilizer applications. I've not found very many farms just looking at the calculation I write on paper and saying, yeah, let's just go with that. Almost all of them are looking for confirmation. They're looking for in-field testing. They're looking to verify that we're not going to reduce their yields by doing this practice.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the group? Feel free to either come off mute or put them in the Q&A section. I have just launched a poll. We would love your feedback on this webinar as well as on future manure injection webinar topics that you would be interested in learning more about. This will help us as we continue to refine our education opportunities for the group. I don't see any other questions in there, but again, if you could, add your feedback here, it would be super helpful for us as we continue to provide quality education on this topic and others to farm advisors. Eric, is there anything else you want to? If you are interested in the RFP opportunities, Sustainable Chesapeake, Natasha is the point of contact there. It looks like maybe one other question came in. At what value are nutrients too low to consider injection?
I would say that dairy manure in particular, I think probably 30% of the dairies that we work with, it would be a stretch to think that injection would pay back just on nitrogen, right? They've got to have some other reason for doing it, whether they can prove it's going to increase yield, whether they have neighbor and odor concerns. But the dairy manures in particular, and I would say sow manure, right? Just anything that has low ammonia concentration. Some of those you're really going to struggle to pencil out based on nitrogen. You're going to need to have other factors that help you through that calculation. But duck manure, hog manure, 50% of the dairy manure out there, it works out pretty good.
What about wash water? Have you seen farmers injecting wash water?
I have. I've seen farmers injecting wash water at rates that are surprisingly high, right? And we see the same thing with FPRs, where you have a very low nutrient value FPR. We want to get those injected at 14 to 15,000 gallons to the acre, and it opens up a different can of worms in terms of how we get those applications to infiltrate through the soil. You got to have really good soil quality, or else you're going to have some runoff issues. But we do see injection of low value nutrient sources at much higher rates. And the reason that we would choose injection over surface application is infiltration rates seem to be better when we inject, and we can get back into the fields quicker, by a couple of days.
Okay. I think that's it. And we are exactly at noon. So I just want to thank you all for your time today and for your attendance. Again, if you haven't put your name and CEU information in this chat, please do that now before signing off. And we really appreciate your feedback on this webinar. And we look forward to seeing many of you again next week as we talk about the nutrient management side of manure injection and how those two things play together.